Okay, English versus Rus. This is going to be one of the matches where I'm gonna do a voiceover commentary over a replay as opposed to casting as I'm playing. Simply because I believe there's a lot to learn from this game in particular, and this is a style that right now I'm not that familiar with, and I believe that my brother, who's the English player in this game, is better at, right? So I think, yeah, it's very valuable for me to cast this game more than playing right now an English Rus matchup myself. So the standard is pretty standard, right? You open double scout, just deny as much bounty as possible from your opponent. Like if you can deny your half of the map against Rus, I think you're already happy because they usually go up to 3 scouts, right? Whereas you stay in 2. So if you can deny half of the map while doing 1 less scout, that's very reasonable already. If you're very lucky, let's say that with this scout he found both deer packs, then I think maybe you can go aggressive with one of your scouts, try to be lucky. But if not, I guess like any half of the map should be enough, right? Keep in mind, even though they go up to 3 scouts, you get one from your TC, right? Where usually they don't. So your second scout is way faster than his second scout, so it's yeah, again reasonable to expect to clean half of your map, right? So the opening so far is quite standard, right? 8 on foot, 3 on gold. But now we are going to see the first interesting change from the usual game plan here for the English player. Just going to be Abbey of Kings. Oh, why Abbey of Kings against Rus? So when you think, first of all, the one unit that in general you don't want to make against English, especially in the early game, is Spearman, right? As any SIP, but even more Rus. So by going for the knight, you already, especially if your opponent wants to play 2TC, which is the case for Rus in this matchup, you're already forcing them to go into Spearman, which is really annoying because they cannot rush the TC fast enough, so that they build it before your knight gets there, right? So they need Spearman to deal with it. And then they get stuck building Spearman against English, which is something you really don't want to see. So that's why we saw here that he left few villagers in gold, right? So he has enough to build the knight. And I will put some pressure with the knight. Now he's also going into second TC himself. And all of this is because of the Kremlin. Like the Kremlin really prevents you from being aggressive. Like let's say we open the usual longbowman, we wouldn't get any damage here. And if we try to delay the expansion, the Rus player would just go knights, right? Which are amazing against longbowmen, and then they can put pressure in your base, right? Spearmen is pretty much the opposite. Spearmen are only useful to defend, but he cannot put pressure later in your base, right? If he wants to do so, he has to also invest into stable knights, and it's delayed because you force Spearmen, right? So I think that's the logic behind this opening, which I think is, which makes a lot of sense, right? Like simply deny the TC, right? He has the stone now, but yeah, he needs the Spearmen. If you get a bit poked, it's okay. The king heals himself, right? So now as they get to Spearman, you obviously cannot prevent it anymore. I mean, you could go into longbowman, but I don't think that's I don't think that's smart because Spearman plus the militia should build enough space for the Rus player to make their expand. So I honestly believe this is probably the best approach for English, right? You get whatever you can done with the king, like delaying the TC is already something. And from then you play rather greedy or defensive behind, right? With eco upgrades, second TC and so on. Trying to be aggressive against Rus when they have Kremlin, militia, and potentially knights in feudal age doesn't end up working. So yeah, now also keep in mind, like thinking about the late game, English is probably one of the strongest civs, right? Like Rus is not bad by any means, but if we compare the feudal age of these two civs and their imperial age, I think English has a much better chance in imperial, right? So I guess it's in your interest to just make this game, in this matchup, as long as possible as the English player. At least as long as Rus has this Kremlin with the militia and so on, right? So right now the Rus player is just making enough units to defend their gold. They decided to go for this forward gold simply because I guess the villagers were closer, the Kremlin is here as well. Even if this one is technically closer to the TC, perhaps it's not that easy to defend, right? And as we can see, the English player just or walling themselves in. Again, you shouldn't really expect to be able to kill the RUS player. Could have a mining camp here. You shouldn't expect to be able to kill the RUS player at any point. Like your only possible timings are when they use their militia and you know this is empty. And still the landmark itself is really rough to deal with. So I think as a ship with a very strong late game such as English, it makes a lot of sense to like this approach makes a lot of sense, right? And this upgrade, I think it's correct to not get it if you're only getting one deer pack, right? If this deer pack was spawned like maybe here, then you should get the upgrade, right? Because you're gonna eat both of them. But as it is, not really. I mean, not a massive difference either way, but yeah, unnecessary. And now, yeah, kind of fast castle, but with the entire base wall, right? And now your goal here, when you get to Castle Age, as English, you really want to get a few relics, I believe. Like at least couple relics is good enough. 3 is already amazing. But it's important to keep in mind that that's the only thing you want to fight for the RUS, and that you cannot really take army against army engagement usually, simply because of the militia, right? So I think it's better to just use mobility in order to try to secure, yeah, these two, right? I mean, by default you have this one already because you're walled in. This one is very likely to also go for the English player, so if somehow you can get one of these two, that's already very good for you. Then again, just 2 relics is also playable, right? Because you have a 30C at the end of the day, right? With the King's Palace, so if the villager count now is even, eventually it should be good for you. So yeah, this is why he's going for knights, even though the RUS player made a few spearmen and so on, because he's not necessarily looking for a straight engagement, but just stealing the relics, right? And eventually he will have enough archers to deal with the spearmen, right? Like longbowmen are amazing against spearmen. Like the extra range makes you able to kill them from really afar, right? That's why in general you really don't like going into spearmen against English, but if the English player can kind of force it with the knight opening into cavalry and so on. So now we're seeing the monastery already. He decided first to get few knights. I assume just so that you have enough in the map to chase the warrior monks, right? And then you can start and also fighting your opponent knights. And once you can more or less peel their army and so on, you can start thinking about gathering relics yourself, right? So yeah, as long as there's no militia, you should take trades, right? You have the king, you heal up. So it's more about not losing units other than anything else. Only that much you can find. Like if you can snipe on villager, sure, why not? But at no point his intention is killing the RUS player going inside the base, right? Just a second, putting pressure. Forcing, this is also something he was looking forward to. So here, because there was this relic here, and the English player was so aggressive here, the RUS player kind of assumed that a monk was about to arrive, right? And he definitely doesn't want to give away, like these 2 relics are the most important ones. Because these 2 will go for the English, this will go for the RUS, and this one should go for the RUS player as well, but it's not as clear. And this is the one that will be contested, right, the most. The RUS player really wants to get it. He's already behind in villagers. He's going into what looks to be the late game against English. English farms are amazing, right? Especially later on. So yeah, you should, like it's not an insta loss if the English player gets 3 relics, but as the RUS player, you definitely don't want that to happen for free, right? So this was a good mind game from the English player. Now all the militia is used. The monk changed direction. He was going for this relic initially, but he went for the other one, right? Because of the militia, of course. Now the militia dies. But the RUS player wasn't fast enough gathering the relic himself, right? So perhaps what the English player does here is just run towards the relic, right? It's still there, you can see in the minimap, even if you don't have vision. So you definitely want to contest it. Now there's no militia, right? So this fight with low moment against Spearman should be good for the English player with the Knight and so on. So the army value is rather close, but yeah, see, this is like a few seconds late. Maybe he will get it, we'll see. It's just like 5 seconds too slow, right? Notice how he's not gathering this relic yet. He's thinking more long term, right? Like you could think, if I get this relic, it starts sticking already, right? And that's some goal that I have. But it's way more important to actually secure as many as possible. Like, yeah, I was about to say that maybe you could do a second monk to get this relic, deliver it, and maybe capture this side, right? Because it seems you have the map control after the use so many militia. But yeah, it looks like 3 relics for the English player. That's goal accomplished. Like if he wanted to now, he could just go back and just hide inside his base and wait for Imperial Age, right? But if you have the map control, you may do other things, right? Like maybe you can get the stone, get a keep here, secure the side. A keep here would be amazing as well. You deny this goal, you secure the side, get the stone as well. But the point is that you don't need to fight anymore here as the English player. The most important thing has already happened, right? Like the 3 relics. Now he's starting to get more blacksmith upgrades. I assume for the archers especially, yeah. Like when your comp is knight heavy, blacksmith upgrades aren't that relevant in knight fights, right? Because they do a lot of damage. So one armor or 1 damage in a knight versus knight fight doesn't make that much of a difference, right? But with longbowmen against spearmen or longbowmen in general, +1/+2 makes quite a difference. It's just that in order to get relics, you value more mobility, so you value knight count over anything else. So he's getting this side. Why not, right? If you can get them, why wouldn't you? Putting some pressure, but again, I don't think the goal for the English player is just to go for the kill. In fact, I don't even think he ever fights outside of the network of castles, unless he sees a very clear win. So the RUS player here, I mean, I think you can go into crossbowmen. As the English player, I'm not that sure, because longbowmen are amazing against spearmen, and they are decent against knight because of the extra damage. But as RUS here against this many knights, I think you should go into crossbowmen. I don't know about the mangonel. I feel like knight crossbowmen should be very good against this. Even the horseman spear could be good. Not too sure. Let's change this a bit. Sounds louder in replays for whatever reason. So yeah, notice the constant hit and run and spearman sniping. This is why longbowmen are amazing, because even here, like regardless, like they start running and you kill like 4 or 5 more dodging the shot. That's very precise micro here from Vortex, right? And as soon as the spearmen come back, he will just start like knights back, and then you just start sniping them as you still dodge mangonel shots, right? Like this is a textbook micro from the English player. Like disengage without micro wouldn't have been this one-sided at all, but he just did it properly. Right? Now this is a really hard game for the English player. For the RUS player, sorry. The English player has the 3 sides. They are walling you further in, right? So these 2 goals won't be accessible for you. Berkshire will defend this side and put a lot of pressure in your immediate base. So this is the only thing you could try to somehow maybe try to get a keep in yourself, something along those lines. But even that won't be that easy, right? Because he has a knight here for some vision, he has the mobility, and he has the army supply after this fight, right? So yeah, things are now really hard for RUS. And this is what you should be trying to do as English in this matchup, I feel like. I just try to speed up the game as much as you can, like try to skip a feudal if you can, try even to skip castle age after the relics are gone if you can. Like the very late game is your best bet against RUS in general. I mean not in general, with English. Because let's say I'm Ottoman, I really don't want to play Ottoman against RUS in the very late game. I mean, maybe you can, but just RUS is not a bad late game sip, right? That's the thing I want, like the point I want to make here. It's just that English is really good in the late game, so it's one of those ships that can compete, right, with eventually enclosures, tier 3 food. This like when he has gold, he will get so many amazing upgrades. Plus, he has a network of castles. Will become citadel soon, probably. Like at this point, it's the Rus is in a rough spot. I'm not even sure if he's gathering gold anymore. He has some income, right? But like this gold is still full, I guess. But once this is gone, once these two are gone and this goes to the very late game, he's gonna have a really hard time getting his Streltsy army, right? I kind of interested. This is a bug, I assume, right? Because you cannot make Streltsy in Castellates. Like it shouldn't show us if you could, but anyways. So yeah, now the secret victory is ticking. We start to see some of those upgrades that I mentioned. Mostly the army ones, I assume. He just doesn't want. Like let's say the Rus player suddenly tries to make an all-in here by building a keep with all his army and 20 villagers. So you really want to have your army upgraded, right? If you have to take a fight over here, maybe even a tower here, or just a keep from yourself would be amazing. So yeah, he's sending villagers now, I assume, for keep and then mining, right? So yeah, very precise game here. And the Rus player, it's kind of stuck in Castellates, making some traps to kill the Berkshire, but I don't think he realizes here that even though the army supply isn't that bad, he will. It's very unlikely that he ever wins a Castellates fight here against this army. So then again, yeah, I mean he does have a farm setup, a reasonable one. But yeah, at this point it feels like the game really got out of control for the Rus player. Now Vortex is making the ram transition. I assume to just kill his opponent, right? Again, if you want to play a bit more passive or whatever, you can just make like keeps in the sides and go for the side victory, right? I mean, he's doing it in a way that he has this keep here, Berkshire here, potentially another keep there, right? But going for the ram push is also okay, right? This is up to preference. You're going for some raids, why not, right? He's now getting the keep we mentioned. So now it's a good time to raid. I mean, raiding is always great, right? But the Rus player really has no counterplay here, except for defending the villagers, right? Like if they go here, there's the Berkshire, there's nothing they can do. If they go here, there's a keep, and by the time they get here, there's a keep as well, right? And they would lose their entire economy because they don't have defensive keeps or anything along those lines, right? So I feel like this move is close to checkmate at this point. He's never gonna suicide the knights into the spearman, right? This is just winning time, like getting every single upgrade in the game, killing villagers. You may lose a few knights, but he's already working into a men-at-arms replacement already. By going men-at-arms, these 20 spearmen will be kinda useless. And the crossbowmen should die to the longbowmen, right? Like once you get this upgrade with longbows, like switching between targets is really fast, right? So you can snipe crossbowmen from your opponent really quickly. So yeah, now the raids, like once you get to the late game, you really don't want to be raiding with knights because they are too gold intensive. So you kind of prefer just throwing horsemen around, right? So the Rus player has decided to try to break this location, right? They will most likely try to get their own keep. They don't have the stone though. So perhaps, okay, their own keep as landmark, right? And Vortex is gonna rotate here. Maybe this goes up, but remember he already made that ram transition, or the upgrades at least, right? So this shouldn't be too hard to break for him. This was probably the only thing the Rus player could do to deny a side, right? So in that sense, it's a correct move, right? But thinking long term, it's very unlikely that they can win this game, no? Also now, you still need to upgrade boiling oil, right? So like he has the placements because it's the Rus landmark, but not really boiling oil. Now I don't think this will necessarily go down immediately. But yeah, the base is exposed now. So as the Rus player deals with this decoy, he's probably gonna lose I mean, a lot of villagers, right? And then with this bank and this production, you really don't care about losing your entire army if you trade it decently, right? So they really focused in this location, but their base is gonna go down. At this point, this looks it has looked rough for a while, but this is probably the nail in the coffin here. I would guess. Like, yes, 80 supply maybe. Yeah. GG. Yeah, so I thought this game was really interesting. I think the strategy here, as the English player, it's really cool. Like, not necessarily. Um, this strategy doesn't necessarily put English in the like favored in the matchup. Like, I would still prefer being the RUS here, but I believe this is probably the best approach we have right now in season 5. So again, one of those few videos where I do a voiceover over just an FP bot of myself. Hopefully this was useful to you, and see you in tomorrow's guide.